My name is Nancy Richards, and what I'm about to tell you isn't just another testimony, it's a revelation that changed everything you knew about the death of Jesus Christ. I've spent 23 years as a biblical history professor, but no amount of academic study could have prepared me for what I experienced during the 4 minutes I was clinically dead. What I saw wasn't just a vision or a fleeting dream, it was a piercing reality. A revelation so urgent, so profoundly unsettling, that I can no longer stay silent. I need you to listen carefully because this isn't just about the past, it's about the present, about you, and about the world we live in right now. What I witnessed could reshape not only how we understand history, but how we live our lives right now. But before we start, please let me know where you're listening from. It will be nice to feel closer, even if we're physically apart. Also, don't forget to like and comment on what you thought about this near-death experience testimony. Let's have a fair and open discussion so we can learn from each other on this channel. Enjoy listening. It happened on July 15, 2023. I was leading an archaeological dig in Jerusalem, something I'd done dozens of times before. The summer heat was intense that day, well over 100 degrees. Despite taking regular water breaks and staying in the shade when possible, I began feeling lightheaded around midday. I dismissed it as simple heat exhaustion, a decision that nearly cost me my life. As I was examining some pottery fragments in one of the dig sites, my chest suddenly felt like it was being crushed in a vice. The pain was excruciating, radiating down my left arm. Before I could call for help, everything went black. I later learned that I had suffered a massive heart attack, brought on by an undiagnosed congenital heart condition combined with severe dehydration. My research assistant found me unconscious at the dig site. By the time the emergency medical team arrived, I had no pulse. They worked on me for 4 minutes before my heart started beating again. Those 4 minutes felt like an eternity, during which I experienced something so profound that I'm still struggling to find the words to describe it. The moment my heart stopped, I felt myself floating above my body. I could see the medical team working frantically. I could hear my assistant Sarah crying out prayers. But then everything shifted, and I found myself transported through what I can only describe as a tunnel of pure light. What happened next was not just a vision or a dream, it was more real than anything I've ever experienced in my life. I found myself standing in ancient Jerusalem, but not as a mere observer. The air was thick with tension, and the sky had taken on an unnatural darkness. Then I heard his voice, a voice that seemed to resonate through every fiber of my being. "Nancy." I turned and there he was, Jesus Christ himself. His presence was overwhelming, radiating a love and authority that brought me to my knees. But he gently helped me up, his touch filling me with a peace I'd never known before. "My child," he said, "I have brought you here for a purpose. What you are about to witness are the 7 signs that accompanied my death, signs that most people today have only read about, but which you will now see with your own eyes. These are not just historical events, Nancy. Each one carries a profound message that humanity needs to understand." The intensity in his voice made me tremble. "Lord," I whispered, "why me?" "Because you have spent your life studying these events as history. Now you will experience them as reality, and through your testimony, others will understand their true significance." What Jesus showed me over the next several hours, though time seemed to have no meaning in that state, was far more shocking and profound than anything I'd learned in my years of academic study. He revealed to me the 7 supernatural events that occurred at his death, but not just as a passive observer. He helped me understand their deep spiritual significance in a way that has transformed my understanding forever. "Watch carefully," Jesus said. "What you're about to witness is the moment that changed eternity." The first shock came when Jesus showed me the supernatural darkness that covered the land. But experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from reading about it in the Gospels. The darkness was thick, almost tangible, a darkness that seemed to have both physical and spiritual weight. "Lord," I asked, "I've always taught my students that this couldn't have been a solar eclipse because of the Passover timing. But what exactly was it?" Jesus' response was profound. "You taught correctly, Nancy. This darkness was my Father turning his face away as I bore the sins of humanity. Every shadow you see represents the weight of mankind's transgression. Watch closely." He then showed me something I'd never understood before, how the darkness progressed in 3 distinct phases over those 3 hours. The first hour, he explained, represented the darkness of humanity's past sins. The second hour symbolized the present sins I was bearing at that moment. The third hour represented all future sins that would be forgiven through my sacrifice. I watched in awe as the darkness deepened with each hour, feeling the spiritual weight of each phase. The oppressive darkness was so thick it felt suffocating, yet Jesus helped me understand its purpose. This darkness, he said, was not just a sign, it was a demonstration of the spiritual reality of sin being judged. Every shadow was a prophecy being fulfilled, every moment of darkness was redemption being purchased. He reminded me of the prophecy from Amos that I had often quoted in my lectures. On that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. But Nancy, Jesus said, this was more than just prophecy being fulfilled. Each moment of darkness was a testament to the price being paid for humanity's redemption. As I stood there with Jesus, still trembling from witnessing the supernatural darkness, he turned to me and said, Now, Nancy, I will show you something that changed the relationship between God and humanity forever. In an instant, we were inside the temple in Jerusalem. I gasped as I saw the magnificent veil before us, the barrier that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. As a professor, I had taught about this veil countless times, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. It towered above us, nearly 60 feet high, and I could see the intricate patterns woven into its thick fabric. Touch it, Jesus instructed gently. With trembling fingers, I reached out and felt the heavy material. It was thicker than I had imagined, like a heavy carpet, woven with multiple layers of fine twisted linen, blue, purple, and scarlet threads. Many scholars debate the thickness of this veil, Jesus said. It was indeed as thick as a man's hand, requiring many priests just to handle it. But watch what happens at the moment of my death. Suddenly, there was a deafening sound, like thunder, but different. To my astonishment, the veil began to tear, starting from the very top. The ripping sound was terrifying, like the fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. But what struck me most was that it wasn't just falling or tearing randomly, it was being deliberately split from top to bottom by an unseen force. Lord, I whispered, I've always taught that the direction of the tear, from top to bottom, proved it was God's action, not human intervention. Yes, Jesus replied. But there's more. Notice where the tear begins. I looked up and realized the tear started at the very point where the blood would have been sprinkled by the high priest on the Day of Atonement. This was no coincidence, Jesus explained. Just as the high priest would sprinkle blood 7 times on the Day of Atonement, my blood was providing the final, perfect atonement. The tearing of the veil wasn't just about providing access to God, it was a divine declaration that the old system of sacrifice was forever finished. I watched as priests nearby fell to their knees in terror, some covering their faces, others crying out in shock. Jesus continued, These men had grown up believing that looking into the Holy of Holies meant certain death. Now, in an instant, everything they thought they knew about approaching God was transformed. But Lord, I asked, why didn't they all believe when they saw this miracle? Jesus' response was profound, the same reason many today see evidence of my work yet choose not to believe. They were more committed to their system than to the truth it pointed to. But watch what happens next. The ground beneath our feet began to shake violently. This was the third shocking sign, and experiencing it was far more intense than I could have imagined. The earthquake wasn't just powerful, it had a purpose. Feel the tremors, Jesus instructed. Each one has meaning. As the ground shook, I could sense different intensities and patterns in the quake. Jesus explained, the first tremors broke the rocks, symbolizing how my death breaks hard hearts. The second wave opened the tombs, showing my power over death. The third series of tremors shook the foundations of the temple, signifying the end of the old covenant. I watched in awe as rocks split apart, not in random patterns, but in ways that seemed deliberate and meaningful. In your lectures, Jesus said, you've taught about this earthquake as a historical event. But it was also a profound spiritual statement. Creation itself was responding to the death of its creator. Then came the fourth shocking sign, one that I had always struggled to fully explain to my students. Before my eyes, tombs began to open, and something even more extraordinary happened. the dead began to rise. "Lord," I said, "who were these people?" Jesus smiled and said, "Let me introduce you to some of them." To my amazement, he led me to speak with several of these resurrected saints. They were people who had died in faith, waiting for the Messiah's coming. Each had a unique story of how they had held on to God's promises during their lifetime. One elderly man, who introduced himself as Benjamin, told me how he had died just months before Jesus began his ministry. "I knew the Messiah was coming soon," he said, his eyes bright with joy. "I just didn't know I would have to die first to see him." Jesus then led me to meet more of the resurrected saints. A woman named Miriam, who had died believing in the promised Messiah, shared her story. "I spent my life studying the prophecies about the Messiah. When I died, I knew he was coming soon. Now not only am I alive again, but I'm standing in his presence." These saints, Jesus explained to me, weren't just randomly chosen. Each one represents a different aspect of faith and waiting for redemption. Their resurrection wasn't just about showing my power over death, it was a preview of what my death and resurrection would mean for all believers. I noticed something fascinating about these resurrected individuals. They seemed to glow with an inner light, yet they were completely physical and tangible. "Lord," I asked, "why did they have to wait until after your resurrection to appear to people in Jerusalem?" Jesus' answer was profound, "Because I am the first fruits of resurrection." Their rising was a testament to my victory over death, but they couldn't appear until that victory was complete. Watch what happens when they enter Jerusalem. He showed me scenes of these saints appearing to their loved ones in Jerusalem. The reactions were incredible, a mixture of joy, shock, and awe. Some family members fell to their knees in worship, while others ran through the streets proclaiming what they had seen. Each appearance, Jesus explained, was carefully orchestrated to provide undeniable testimony of my power over death. These weren't ghost stories or hallucinations, these were physical resurrections that hundreds of people witnessed. Then Jesus directed my attention to something equally powerful, the fifth shocking sign. We stood near the cross, where I saw a Roman centurion and his soldiers standing guard. What happened next was extraordinary. "Watch his face," Jesus instructed, pointing to the centurion. I observed as the hardened soldier's expression changed from professional detachment to growing concern, then to fear, and finally to absolute conviction. The transformation was amazing to witness. This man, Jesus explained, had overseen countless crucifixions. He had seen hundreds of men die, but he had never seen anyone die like me. Watch what happens when he connects all the supernatural signs he's witnessing. The centurion's voice rang out clear and strong. Surely this was the Son of God. His declaration sent chills through my body. "Lord," I asked, "what made him so certain?" Jesus' response was illuminating. He saw how I forgave those who crucified me. He witnessed my care for my mother even in my final moments. He heard my cry of "it is finished," not a cry of defeat, but a declaration of victory. But most importantly, he saw how all creation, the sky, the earth, even death itself, responded to my sacrifice. Then Jesus showed me something I hadn't considered before, how this centurion's confession influenced his soldiers and eventually spread throughout the Roman ranks. His testimony, Jesus explained, became one of the early seeds of faith among the Gentiles. A Roman soldier became one of the first to recognize what many religious leaders refused to see. The sixth shocking sign involved the crowd's reaction, and Jesus allowed me to experience this in a way that brought new understanding. We moved among the people who had gathered to watch the crucifixion, and I could feel the dramatic shift in their emotions. "Notice," Jesus said, "how their mockery turns to fear, their arrogance to trembling. Watch their faces as they begin to realize what they've done." I saw people beating their breasts in anguish, a sight I had read about but never fully understood until that moment. Jesus explained, this gesture wasn't just cultural, it was a deep expression of personal guilt and grief. Many of these same people would later be among the 3,000 who believed in Pentecost. Then he showed me something that broke my heart, people I recognized from earlier scenes, who had shouted "Crucify him," now falling to their knees in remorse. Some of these, Jesus said, would become the first members of the early church. Their transformation from mockers to believers shows that no one is beyond redemption. But then came the seventh shocking sign, the consequences for those who rejected these divine testimonies. Jesus showed me scenes that extended beyond that day, revealing how the rejection of these signs led to profound consequences. "Watch carefully," he said. These consequences weren't just punishment, they were the natural result of rejecting clear divine testimony. I witnessed scenes of the temple's destruction in 70 AD, exactly as Jesus had prophesied. This wasn't just about buildings being destroyed, he explained. It was the end of a system that had served its purpose and was now obsolete because of my completed work. Jesus then showed me something even more profound about these consequences. "Nancy," he said, "watch what happened in the hearts of those who rejected these signs." I saw the religious leaders gathering secretly, discussing how to suppress the truth about the supernatural events they had witnessed. Their faces showed inner turmoil. They knew something divine had occurred, yet they chose to reject it. "Look at their eyes," Jesus instructed. "See how they struggle with what they've witnessed." I watched as they debated what to do about the torn veil, how to explain the earthquake, how to suppress reports of the resurrected saints. One priest, his hands trembling, argued that they should acknowledge these signs as divine intervention, but others quickly silenced him. "Lord," I asked, "why did they resist so strongly when the evidence was so clear?" Jesus' response was profound. They had built their entire identity around being the gatekeepers between God and people. When the veil tore, it didn't just expose the Holy of Holies, it exposed the emptiness of their system. They faced a choice: admit they had been wrong or defend their position at all costs. Then Jesus showed me something that made my academic understanding pale in comparison. He revealed how each of these 7 signs was interconnected, forming a perfect testimony to his identity and mission. The darkness, he explained, showed the weight of sin being judged. At that moment, I took upon myself every sin, past, present, and future. The darkness wasn't just physical, it was the shadow of divine judgment falling on me instead of humanity. He continued, "The torn veil demonstrated that through my death, access to God was no longer restricted. The earthquake showed that the old foundations were being shaken to establish something new. The resurrected saints proved my power over death. The Centurion's confession demonstrated that faith comes through recognizing these signs. The crowd's reaction showed how truth confronts every heart, and the consequences revealed what happens when clear testimony is rejected." As I absorbed these revelations, Jesus showed me more details about each event that I had never understood before. The darkness, he explained, had different qualities during each hour. The first hour representing the darkness of separation from God, the second hour showing the darkness of judgment, and the third hour revealing the darkness of redemption being accomplished. The tear in the temple veil, he showed me, followed the exact pattern of the high priest's blood sprinkling on the Day of Atonement, 7 spots of tear points matching where the blood would have been sprinkled. "This wasn't coincidence," Jesus said. "It was my Father's signature on the new covenant." The earthquake, I learned, had specific patterns that corresponded to Old Testament prophecies. Jesus showed me how each tremor fulfilled a different prophetic word, demonstrating that nothing about his death was random or unplanned. The resurrection of the saints, he revealed, was carefully orchestrated to impact specific people in Jerusalem. Each person who was raised, he explained, had a testimony that would speak to particular groups in Jerusalem. Some had been respected teachers, others were known for their prophecies about the Messiah, and still others had been martyred for their faith. The Centurion's confession, Jesus showed me, had ripple effects throughout the Roman military structure. His words, Jesus said, spread through the ranks, preparing the way for many Roman soldiers to later become believers. This was part of my plan to extend salvation beyond Israel to all nations. The crowd's reaction, he explained, was more than just an emotional response. "Watch their faces again," he instructed. I saw how their expressions changed from mockery to fear to genuine conviction. Many of these people, Jesus said, would carry this memory until Pentecost, when Peter's preaching would bring it all together for them. Then Jesus showed me something that brought all these signs into sharp focus. These 7 signs, he said, weren't just proving my identity. They were revealing the complete work of salvation. The darkness showed the price being paid. The torn veil revealed the access being granted. The earthquake demonstrated the old being replaced by the new. The resurrected saints previewed the power of resurrection life. The Centurion's confession showed the way of faith. The crowd's reaction revealed how truth demands response. And the consequences demonstrated the seriousness of rejecting divine testimony. As my time with Jesus drew to a close, he had one final revelation for me. "Nancy," he said, "you've spent your life studying these events academically. Now you've witnessed them personally. But there's one more thing you need to understand." He then showed me how these 7 signs continue to speak today. The darkness still shows people their need for salvation. The torn veil still invites them into God's presence. The earthquake still shakes what needs to be shaken in their lives. The resurrected saints still testify to my power over death. The Centurion's confession still shows the way of faith. The crowd's reaction still demonstrates how truth confronts every heart. And the consequences still warn about the danger of rejecting clear testimony. Just before I felt myself being pulled back to my body, Jesus gave me a final commission: tell them what you've seen. Tell them these weren't just historical events, they were divine declarations that continue to speak today. Tell them that each sign points to a reality they can experience: freedom from sin's darkness, direct access to God, old foundations being shaken to establish the new, resurrection power, confession of faith, genuine repentance, and the importance of responding to divine testimony. As I began to feel the pull back to my body, Jesus' final words echoed in my spirit: "Nancy, you died to see these things, but I died to accomplish them." Every person who hears your testimony must decide how they will respond to these 7 signs. When I regained consciousness in the hospital, the medical team was amazed by my recovery. The cardiologist later told me that my type of heart attack normally has only a 10% survival rate. But I knew why I had survived. I had been given a mission to share what I had witnessed. The experience changed not just my understanding of these events, but how I teach them. No longer do I present them as mere historical facts. Now I share them as living truths that continue to impact our relationship with God today. Since my near-death experience, I've come to understand that these 7 signs weren't just coincidences or natural phenomena. They were God's dramatic demonstration of the cosmic significance of Christ's sacrifice. Each sign continues to speak, calling us to recognize who Jesus is and what his death accomplished. When people ask me if I'm afraid of death now, I smile and tell them no. How can I fear death when I've experienced firsthand the presence of the one who conquered it? My near-death experience showed me that what happened at the moment of Jesus' death continues to echo through eternity, offering hope and transformation to everyone who believes. These 7 shocking signs, the darkness, the torn veil, the earthquake, the resurrected saints, the Centurion's confession, the crowd's reaction, and the consequences of rejection, weren't just historical events. They were God's declaration of a new covenant, a new way of relating to him, and a new hope for humanity. Through my experience, I learned that each of us is invited to participate in this new reality that was inaugurated through Christ's death. My prayer is that my testimony will help others understand not just what happened on that day in Jerusalem, but what it means for their lives today. These 7 signs continue to speak, inviting us all to recognize Jesus for who he truly is, the Son of God who died to give us direct access to the Father.